Yeah, and I think the big takeaways, I think the highlights for the energy folks in terms of what this big, beautiful bill looks like for our industry. I think the two standouts for me are the House bill mandates that projects seeking the technology neutral clean electricity production tax credit, the PTC 45Y, and the investment tax credit, ITC 48E, must begin construction within 60 days of the bill's enactment and then be placed into service by December 31st. And I think, Dan, as you and I know, any project that isn't literally about to break ground is never going to qualify for that. So unless you're ready to get going on this, I think it essentially kills any of the tax credits.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if the same safe harbor. I've talked to a lot of folks in the industry. This is we're not accountants, not tax advice, but a lot of folks do seem to believe that there's going to be the remainder of the tax harbor where you can incur 5% of the costs and still get that. But to your point, you still have to be well down the path in doing one of these projects to get to that point.
Hey, power people. Welcome back to another episode of Renewable Rides. And today we're hitting the accelerator on policy and its impacts. We have two mega bills that are fighting for the headlines. In Austin and Texas, we just watched 3 anti-renewable proposals crash and burn, while Washington is ramming through the one big beautiful bill by a single vote. Meanwhile, Elon is out and unhappy with the machine that keeps driving forwards. Turns out that getting people to give up their budgets is harder than he thought. And there's a lot of negativity in the market. But what do these changes actually mean for your on-site energy projects and the industry? We don't think it's all that bad. But Dan, excited to dig in?
Absolutely, Gareth. Good to be back at it. And what a wild time it has been.
It is bonkers, especially every day in the news. We have the big players, the big personalities butting heads. And it's interesting to see how all this is going to play out. But I think first, from a context perspective, in Texas, ERCOT powers 90% of Texas with solar, wind, and gas. It's number 1 in the country in wind production, number 2 solar, and it's in the top 3 for gas production. And because it's isolated from the rest of the grid, every rule that passes through Austin actually fully impacts the market in force. And so it's a really interesting way to actually see what the dynamic is in a state and how it's going to ripple out across the market more broadly.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the one big beautiful bill impacts both the energy industry directly with the incentive and policy changes, but also passively and increasingly the national debt. So by up to $2.5 trillion over the next decade by some calculations, through expanding some of the tax cuts, but really, more importantly, ballooning the deficits.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And I think the passive impact on the energy industry is that when treasury yields jump, the cost of capital typically does too. And so that's why these stories are completely interlinked. And I think it'll be fun to dig into what's going on in Texas as well as in Washington.
Yeah, well, let's take a look at Texas. So if we rewind back to February 2021, Winter Storm Uri. After that really crazy winter spell, and hopefully something that we don't see for quite some time, but unfortunately, I'd imagine we will be seeing more of it. The legislature in Texas passed SB 2 and SB 3, which were around ERCOT's board reform and specifically compulsory weatherization. That was a big problem during that winter storm. And these bills aim to address the vulnerabilities exposed during that winter storm.
Yeah, so awesome. I think much needed, because it was found that actually it wasn't, the reports around solar being impacted and wind turbine, it was actually the gas infrastructure being completely frozen up. So awesome to see that was enacted and is appearing to work very effectively. And then fast forward to 2023, and the lawmakers created the Texas Energy Fund. This was $5 billion in low interest loans for new gas plants. And on the face of it, it sounded all really great. And then what happened very quickly thereafter is 4 developers yanked almost 5 gigawatts of projects this spring, saying that the math for the market just didn't make sense anymore for these big gas plants. So super interesting to see the dynamics there.
Yeah, well, and not to mention the long lead times on them getting their infrastructure to build these gas plants. So, and then this spring, in the spring session, they tried to pile on 3 major restrictions. So SB 715 or 715 made renewables by gas backup.
Yep.
SB 819 was around state permits for every wind and solar site above 10 megawatts, and SB 388 requiring half of all new renewable capacity to be gas,
Yeah.
which doesn't really seem like letting the market dynamics and the free market speak. Yet recently, all three of those died.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing as well, Dan, because some of the research done by Aurora Energy said that if they'd have passed, it would have increased wholesale prices by anywhere between 10 and 14% and could have caused 3 gigawatts of load shedding during extreme heat periods. And this is a time when the grid is already constrained. So super interesting to see what the impacts would have been if they'd have passed.
Certainly. Well, not all the bad bills were squashed. That's not the only news. There was
Yep.
a really bright spot with SB 1202, which was a bill around a 15-day permit clock for behind-the-meter solar and battery energy storage. And that cruised through the Capitol with a unanimous vote of 7-0. And it really cuts into the soft costs for these behind-the-meter installations.
Yeah, totally. And in plain terms, what this means is less red tape, lower costs, faster installs, all really good for the industry because we need to reduce these soft costs as much as possible. Because today it's estimated anywhere between 30 and 70% of project costs are soft costs. We'll dig into that in a future episode because I think it's a really important topic. But this includes the origination of projects, the consultation, the preliminary design, the permitting, the contracts, the procurement, all of this that people don't factor into the overall cost of projects. And really it leads to just a drag on the whole industry. And what this actually leads to is it was found in Texas that the average all-in cost, and this is for residential, it's slightly different for commercial, but the data around residential is super crisp and clear. $2.60 to $3.30 per watt fully installed, versus in Australia where they've really streamlined the process, it's $1 a watt. So you can see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a massive opportunity for the whole industry for us to realize huge benefits by just making the whole process more efficient. And this SB 1202 tackles those soft costs by cutting out those permitting delays and empowering professionals to just keep driving the projects forward without a lot of oversight. So super exciting, faster installs, which means we can get more grid capacity, we can provide more stability, especially through the deployment of batteries through extreme weather, which is good for individuals and businesses. Lower system costs, greater adoption because the cheaper we can make these systems, the more people are going to want to deploy them, which leads to more jobs and ultimately low emissions, which is great for all of us. So by all accounts, such an amazing outcome.
And it made me think, and I think I shared this with you the other day, but I was catching up with my wife's cousin who had lost their house in Altadena, as I mentioned, and they were asking me about they're looking to put solar on their new home that they're kind of getting started in the rebuild process. But they shared with me that similarly, they're in this like kind of devastated area that needs to be rebuilt as quickly as possible. They're on the homes and the permitting around those, they're allowing registered and licensed engineers to go through and stamp the permits. Nice. Which I think that's a really small microcosm of an area that wants to rebuild and get things going quickly. I think it's nice to see this in Texas where we can do this with these energy systems. Hopefully it's going to prove out to be successful and we can start to replicate that across the country.
Yeah, love it. And while it is silent on commercial industrial, it doesn't seem to exclude it. Like it definitely seems to be geared more towards residential, but I think it's something we need to take advantage of and really drive into the commercial industrial space as well. So then we come to our big, beautiful bill. And on May 22nd, the House passed this bill by 215 to 214, the tightest margin possible. And Dan, what does this mean?
And so that passed in the House. And as these things go, now it moves to the Senate. It's been sitting with the Senate for a couple of weeks now. And the Senate is rewriting it. Senator Rand Paul is threatening to withhold his vote unless the debt ceiling hike shrinks or grows, depending on which blueprint you read. The House version lifts it to $4 trillion. The Senate drafters toy with a $5 trillion limit. We'll see how it all pans out.
Yeah, and I think the big takeaways, I think the highlights for the energy folks in terms of what this big, beautiful bill looks like for our industry. I think the two standouts for me are The House bill mandates that projects seeking the technology neutral clean electricity production tax credit, the PTC 45Y, and the investment tax credit, ITC 48E, must begin construction within 60 days of the bill's enactment, and then be placed into service by December 31st. And I think, Dan, as you and I know, any project that isn't literally about to break ground is never going to qualify for that. So unless you're ready to get going on this, I think it essentially kills any of the tax credits.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if the same safe harbor. I've talked to a lot of folks in the industry. This is we're not accountants, not tax advice, but a lot of folks do seem to believe that there's going to be the remainder of the tax harbor where you can incur 5% of the costs and still get that. But to your point, you still have to be well down the path in doing one of these projects to get to that point.
Yeah, and the other big one is restrictions on the transferability. So transferability of credits, which has been a mechanism for us to sell these tax credits, and it's really opened up the market. That's going to be essentially repealed, and we're going to have to find other ways to maximize the opportunity around those tax credits.
So not all is lost. And I think one of the things that I find interesting over the last couple of weeks is there's a lot of folks in the, call it broadly, renewable space that seemingly feel like the sky is falling and everything's going to collapse. And I think that there are going to be sectors of the industry that do struggle with this. And I think that those are the projects that were mediocre at best, even with the ITC, and now are not nearly as attractive. And we'll talk about a couple examples here. But I still think that there are a lot of great opportunities out there. I'm going to dive into a couple examples here. One of the things that I will call out is, and again, you mentioned the soft costs, and we'll be diving into this in a future episode. The interesting thing is that we have an ability to bring down those soft costs.
Yeah.
There's a lot of chatter in the market about the tax credits actually just boosting the bottom lines and profits of a lot of the developers because they can mask excess margins with the tax credits. And so I think that we're going to see some of that. But the analysis that I ran and that our team ran was around looking at what would a project be with tax credits, with like in some cases 30 or 40% if it qualified for the energy community, and then what would it be without? And we ran a couple different models. The first I'll touch on is a biotechnology firm, 2 locations, one in Northern California, one in the greater Austin area of Texas. And we looked at it 2 different ways. We looked at it one where you maintain and fix the size of the assets, so in this case, solar and battery energy storage, and another one where you re-optimize based on the new market conditions, essentially without the tax credits. And interestingly, in the fixed case, going from a 40% ITC to a 0% ITC, and this is on the facility in Northern California, we saw an impact on the payback period increasing roughly 60% from 3.2 years to 5.2 years, but 5.2 years is still
great,
still a great project, especially in this case, the company was looking to decarbonize, so that's helping there. The net present value decreased 31.5%. The IRR decreased a little less than that at 29.7%. But we're still sitting at an 18% IRR and $2.5 million of net present value. So still attractive projects. And when you re-optimized, given the new no ITC scenario, you see a decrease in the battery energy storage sizing of 34% and a decrease in the CapEx of 6%. So not a huge drop. And the IRR still is impacted by about 28%. So not too dissimilar. Again, this is California.
Yeah.
When we look at the Austin facility, the tax credits go away. The project's not feasible.
Yeah.
The project's simply not feasible. You get a negative net present value. And then, again, that's assuming that the costs of deploying these systems don't change. I think, again, we are going to see some of the costs to deploy come down because we're going to see developer margins that were probably overinflated due to the tax credits come down. The other one that I'll briefly touch on, a bit of a larger project. This is a cold storage facility in Central California. The original run of looking across batteries and solar was looking at a pretty sizable system, 4.5 megawatts of solar, 14 megawatt hours of battery energy storage.
Wow.
And under a 0% ITC scenario, you do see that come down quite substantially. You see the batteries come down 91% to just 1.2 megawatt hours, and the solar sizing come down 58% to 1.8 megawatts. But that it's done that way, or the optimizer selects that to preserve as much of the net present value as you can. So the net present value gets cut in half from $7 to $3.5 million, but the IRR actually goes up, which makes sense because you're decreasing your upfront investment.
Yep.
But again, we're still seeing 16% IRR. If you go solar only, you're looking at 18% IRR with still multi-million-dollar net present values on these systems. So even when in a 0% ITC scenario, assuming the costs of these systems don't change, you still got some great projects out there.
Yeah, I think to bring it home, I think the key is to make sure that you're looking across your portfolio facilities and identifying where does this make the most sense. And I think it's a really interesting concept, isn't it, around how the IRA has potentially inflated the cost of projects. And I'm seeing a few people commenting on this and saying, actually, it won't be a bad thing if the IRA goes away, because those tax incentives that we're getting, we can easily offset that by reducing the soft costs. So if 30% goes away, there's definitely 30% of margin in these projects to be stripped out in terms of streamlining a lot of these inefficiencies and permitting processes and development and origination costs. And so, yeah.
And one could say, if you really play that out, is that taxpayer dollars were not flowing into the making greater economics for the buyers. It was actually taxpayer dollars just flowing into the pocketbooks of the developers. Exactly.
And the equipment providers. Yeah, it's super interesting. So I think the key takeaways are dynamic environment. I think we'll keep on top of the changes. Let's ensure that everyone assesses their projects on merit, because if you looked at a project even a month or two ago, it could look very different today. If you've got projects that are near the finish line, get them contracted so that you don't run any risk of losing out on tax credits if they do go away. And if they do, there's still awesome projects out there. So let's get after it. Let's make it as streamlined as possible, and let's continue to deploy amazing outcomes.
And let's not forget that the impacts of the big, beautiful bill are not isolated to the distributed energy space. This is going to impact utility scale projects, and therefore energy prices are going to go up. The business cases for these systems are going to look that much more attractive. We've seen exorbitant utility rate growth rate over the last several years. We're expected to continue to see that even under a tax credit environment.
Yeah.
If the tax credit goes away, that's going to accelerate even further, making behind the meter systems look that much more attractive.
Yeah, you're totally spot on. I think those stackable benefits will become even more paramount. I think the cost of resilience, the cost of security, the cost of lower insurance premiums, the better price for financing, all of these will start getting factored in to make the project still look incredible.
Absolutely.
Good stuff.
Wild time.
Great time.
Yeah, exactly.
Uncertainty is opportunity.
That's right. That's right. Beautiful. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.